The slap landed before most people understood there was going to be one. Briar Calloway had been watching it build for 10 minutes, the way you watch a kettle you're not sure is plugged in. She'd noticed the single dad come in late during the speeches, slipping along the wall with the kid, noticed because she noticed people, it was the job, and because the two of them didn't fit. Everyone else had arrived in pairs and clusters, loud, already half-cut, knowing where they were sitting. This man had come in alone with a child in a dress that had been ironed too carefully, and he'd stood at the back reading the room the way Briar read rooms, and she'd thought, there's someone who wasn't sure he'd be let in. She'd gone back to her wine, not her business. She'd told herself that 3 times before the bride crossed the floor toward him, and the band played on, and the cracking sound cut across all of it. It cracked across the function room of the Ardenmore Hotel like something dropped on a hard floor, and for a second the band kept playing half a bar, maybe less, before the saxophone player saw what the rest of them saw and let the note die. 200 guests, give or take, the good china, a cake the height of a child. And in the middle of it all, Joel Ashworth standing very still with a red mark blooming across his cheek, and his 6-year-old daughter's hand gripped in his, while the bride stood in front of him with her own hand still raised, and her chest going up and down fast. "You weren't invited," Felicity said. Her voice didn't carry the way the slap had. It came out thin. "You were not invited, Joel. You don't get to just turn up with her today." Nobody moved to help him. That was the part Briar Calloway would remember later, going over it. 200 people, and not one of them stepped forward. They looked at their shoes, or at the bride, or at the little girl who had started to cry without any sound, just tears, the way children cry when they've already learned that noise gets them in trouble. At table 9, a man in a waistcoat leaned to his wife and said something behind his hand, and she laughed, then caught herself and pressed her napkin to her mouth. An elderly uncle near the front kept eating, methodically, as if the whole thing were happening on a television in another room. A bridesmaid had both hands over her mouth and was looking at Felicity with an expression Briar couldn't quite read. Not shock, more like a person watching someone do the thing she'd warned them not to do. A waiter stood frozen by the service door with a tray of full champagne flutes, unable to come forward and unwilling to go back, the glasses trembling very slightly on the silver. Briar clocked all of it. She couldn't help it. 20 years of sitting in rooms watching who flinched and who didn't had wired her to take the temperature of a crowd without deciding to, and the reading she got here was ugly and clear. This room had already chosen sides, long before today, and the man with the red cheek had lost before he walked in. Briar was at table 11, near the back, where they put the people who had to be invited but weren't quite wanted. She'd been watching the single dad since he came in, not because she knew him, she didn't, but because he'd walked in like a man bracing for weather, shoulders set, holding the kid's hand too tightly, and she had a long professional habit of noticing who in a room was afraid. "Daddy," the girl tugged at his sleeve, "Daddy, can we go?" In a minute, Nell. He didn't look down at her, he was looking at Felicity. "I came because you wrote to me. You wrote and asked me to come." "I never." "You did," quiet, not a man trying to win the room, a man stating a fact and watching it not be believed. "You sent a letter last month. You said you wanted to make things right before today. You said bring Nell." His jaw worked. "She's been talking about it for 3 weeks, Felicity. What she'd wear. She made you a card." Something moved across the bride's face and then was gone, smoothed over like a hand wiping a window. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Greg." She turned, scanning, and a tall man in a gray morning suit detached himself from the head table and came toward them with the unhurried walk of someone who has never once in his life had to hurry. "The groom. Get him out, please. He's frightening everyone." "He's not frightening anyone," Briar said. She hadn't planned to say it. It just came out flat from table 11, and a few heads turned. The groom, Gregory, stopped and looked over at her, and his expression was the polite blank of a man trying to place a face. "I'm sorry." "He's not frightening anyone," Briar said again. "There's a child. Maybe leave the child out of it." "And you are a guest." She held his eyes. "Briar, friend of the Pelham side," which was true in the narrowest possible sense. She'd done a piece of work for old Mrs. Pelham 18 months ago, and the woman had taken a liking to her, and the invitation had come out of that, a kindness Briar had nearly declined. She wished now she had. She also, looking at the little girl's wet, silent face, was glad she hadn't. Gregory studied her a beat longer, decided she was no one, and turned back to the more pressing business of the man who was embarrassing his wedding. "Mr. Ashworth, Joel, let's do this outside, yeah." A hand on the shoulder, steering. "There's a good man." Joel shook the hand off. Not violently. He just stepped sideways out from under it, and the small movement had a dignity to it that made the steering look like what it was. "I'll go," he said. "I'm not staying where I'm not, I'll go." He crouched down to Nell's level, and his voice changed completely, went soft and ordinary. "Come on, love. We'll get chips. We'll get chips on the way home, and you can have the card, and we'll give it to her another day." "She doesn't want my card." "She does. She's just busy today." "You're a liar." The kid said it the way kids do, all the way from the bottom, no cushioning. "You said she wanted to see me and she hit you." Joel didn't have an answer for that. He picked her up instead, settled her on his hip, though she was really too big for it, and Nell pressed her face into his neck, and he straightened up and looked at no one and started walking toward the doors. The card fell as he turned. It must have been in Nell's hand the whole time, or up her sleeve, a folded bit of paper gone soft at the creases. A child's drawing on the front of two stick figures holding hands under a yellow scribble of sun, and the careful enormous letters a 6-year-old makes, "To Mummy on your SPESHAL day." It landed face up on the parquet near the cake table, and nobody picked it up, and Joel didn't see it go, and Briar watched it lie there while the band's saxophone player looked at it and then looked away. Felicity saw it. Briar was sure she saw it. Her eyes went to the card on the floor and stayed half a second too long, and something crossed her face, the same thing as before, the hand wiping the window, and then she turned away and said to no one, "Can somebody open the doors?" in a voice that wanted very badly to sound bored. He'd got about halfway when the woman at the head table stood up. Felicity's mother. Briar had clocked her earlier too, Diane Pelham, mother of the bride, a woman who'd spent the morning being photographed and had the slightly glazed shine of someone 3 glasses in before lunch. She stood, and she swayed a little, and she said, loud enough to carry, "Oh, let him take the chips and go. Honestly, some people will do anything for a free meal. Did you see him eyeing the silverware?" A laugh went round the near tables. Not everyone, but enough, the kind of laugh that gives people permission. Joel stopped walking. He stood there with his daughter on his hip and his back to the room, and Briar watched his shoulders, and she thought, don't. Whatever it is, don't. Because she knew that shape, the shape of a person deciding whether to swallow one more thing or finally say the thing they shouldn't. And she knew that for a man like him, holding a kid, outnumbered 200 to 1, saying it would cost him more than swallowing it. He turned around. "I've never taken anything that wasn't mine in my life," he said, to the room, steady. "I work nights at the Bevan Distribution Center. I drive a forklift. I've got the late shift tonight, actually, so I can't even stay for your chips." A breath. "I came because a letter told me my daughter's mum wanted to see her. That's the only reason I'm in this room. I don't want your silverware, and I don't want your dinner. I wanted my kid to have one nice memory of the day her mum got married." He looked at Felicity, and for the first time something in his voice cracked just slightly, just at the edge. "That's all. That's the whole crime." He turned back to the doors. And that was when the first car came up the drive. You could see the gravel sweep through the tall windows of the function room, the long curve of it lined with the catering vans and the guests' Audis and somebody's vintage Bentley that the photographer had been making a fuss of all morning. And down that drive, slow, came a Rolls-Royce. Black. Then behind it a second, and a third. 3 of them, nose to tail, gleaming wet from a shower that hadn't reached inside, crunching up the gravel toward the main doors with the unbothered patience of cars that are never, ever in a queue. Conversation in the room changed pitch. You could hear it. The wedding had had money in it, the Pelhams were comfortable, Gregory's people more than comfortable, but nobody here had come in anything like that. 3 of them, identical, with a kind of weight to them, a seriousness that made the Bentley outside look like it was playing dress-up. "Whose are those?" somebody at table 9 said. Nobody knew. Briar didn't know. But she watched the way the cars moved, and that told her something on its own. They came up the drive in a single, unhurried line and stopped not at the overflow parking where the guests had left their Audis, but right at the doors, square on, blocking everything, the way you park when it has not once occurred to you that anyone might ask you to move. The man in the waistcoat at table 9 had gone quiet. The waiter with the champagne had set his tray down. She watched Felicity's face, and Gregory's and Diane's, and none of them knew either. There was a scramble behind their eyes, that fast social arithmetic of the well-connected trying to work out whether they'd forgotten a guest important enough to forget at their peril. The mother of the bride sat back down. Gregory, who had spent the whole exchange with Joel wearing the easy authority of a man on home ground, put a hand flat on the head table as if to steady himself, and Briar filed that away too. Whoever was in those cars, the groom was not expecting them, and the groom did not like surprises. The cars stopped, doors opened, and out of them came not the elderly aristocrats or the celebrity or whatever the room was hoping for, but ordinary-looking people in good dark coats, 8, 9 of them, unhurried, organizing themselves on the gravel with the quiet coordination of people who do things together often. They didn't look like family. They didn't chatter or check their phones or do any of the things a wedding's worth of late arrivals would do. They spread out a little, glanced at the building, at each other, and one of them, a tall woman with iron-gray hair cut short, said something to the others, and then looked up at the hotel, at the windows, at the wedding looking back out at her. Briar's read on them came fast and certain, and she didn't love it. Those were not guests. That was a team. People who arrived together, parked like that, moved like that, that was people who'd come to do something, not to celebrate something. And Joel Ashworth, halfway to the doors with his daughter on his hip, looked through those same windows at the woman with the gray hair, and Briar saw his whole body change. Not relief, not exactly, something more complicated, something that had grief in it as well, and she heard him say, very quietly, almost to himself, in a voice that didn't match anything he'd said so far. No, they weren't supposed to. Daddy, Nell lifted her head. Daddy, who's that lady? She waved at me. Joel didn't answer her. He'd gone pale under the red mark Felicity's hand had left. The doors of the function room opened. The gray-haired woman came in first out of the cold with that small group behind her, and she stood just inside, taking the room in, the cake, the band, the 200 faces all turned toward her now, the bride frozen by the head table, and she found Joel, and her face did something it clearly didn't do often. It softened. "There you are," she said, just that, as if she'd been looking for him in a supermarket. Then she saw the mark on his cheek, and the child crying, and the way the room was arranged around the two of them like a crowd around a fight, and the softness went out of her, and what replaced it was nothing dramatic. She didn't shout, she didn't move, but the temperature of the room dropped about 10 degrees all the same. "Who hit my son?" she said. The words went into the silence and sat there. Briar, at table 11, felt the whole shape of the afternoon tip over and start sliding in a new direction, and she found, to her own surprise, given that she'd spent 20 years training herself never to be surprised by anything, that she could not for the life of her predict where it was going to land. The single dad on the late forklift shift. The mother who'd written a letter she swore she hadn't written. 3 Rolls-Royces and a woman who called him son. There was a story under this. A big one. Breyer had a nose for them. It was, more or less, her entire profession. And this one was giving off a smell she recognized. The particular smell of something that had been kept quiet for a long time by people who'd had reasons. She refolded her napkin into a neat square and set it down and decided, against every instinct she had about staying out of other people's weddings, that she was going to stay until she understood exactly what was happening in this room, and who that woman was, and why a man who drove a forklift had 3 of those cars turn up for him at the worst moment of his afternoon. "Mum," Joel said into the quiet. He sounded about 12 years old. "Mum, please don't, not here, we were just leaving." But the woman with the gray hair wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at Felicity, and at Diane, swaying by the head table, and at Gregory in his gray morning suit. And she was smiling now, a small, terrible, patient smile, the smile of someone who has just walked into a room and found, laid out in front of her, every single person she'd been hoping to find in one place. "No," she said, "let's not leave. I think we'll stay. I think there are 1 or 2 things that ought to get said while everyone's here and dressed up so nicely." She handed her coat to the man behind her without looking at him. "Where would you like me, Joel?" "Head table. They've left a gap." Her eyes moved to the empty chair beside Felicity, and her smile didn't change. "Funny. It's almost like somebody knew I was coming." Nell had stopped crying. She was watching the gray-haired woman with the total fascination of a child who senses the adults have lost control of the situation. "Daddy," she whispered, "is that lady your mummy?" "Yeah," Joel said. He still looked sick. "Yeah, that's my mum." "Then why don't we ever see her?" And Joel Ashworth, in the middle of a wedding he hadn't been invited to, holding the daughter he'd come to give one good memory, opened his mouth and shut it again, because the answer to that question was the whole story, and it was not a thing you could say to a 6-year-old, and it was not a thing, Breyer could see it in his face, that he had ever fully said out loud to anyone. The gray-haired woman started walking toward the head table. And the wedding, the cake, the band, the 200 guests at the Ardenmore Hotel all held still and watched her come, and nobody, not the bride, not the groom, not the swaying mother, not Breyer at table 11 who made her living from knowing things, had the faintest idea what was about to be opened up in front of them. The gray-haired woman didn't hurry, and the not hurrying was the thing that emptied the room of noise. She walked between the tables the way a surveyor walks a building site, taking the measure of it, and the 8 people in dark coats stayed by the doors and didn't follow, which told Breyer more than anything had yet. She didn't need them close. She'd brought them to be seen, not used. She stopped a few feet from the head table. "Diane," she said, "you've put on weight, suits you." Diane Pelham's wine glass paused on the way to her mouth. "I'm sorry, do I?" "No, you don't." The woman turned to take in the cake, the flowers, the 200 faces. "Beautiful do, must have cost a fortune." A small pause waited exactly. "Whose, I wonder?" "Margaret," Joel's voice from behind her strained. He'd put Nell down and was holding her hand again, edging up the side of the room. "Mum, whatever you came to do, please, not in front of." "Sit down, Joel." "Mum." "Sit down, love. You've done your part. You came. You stood in front of all these nice people and let them call you a thief." Her voice didn't rise, but something under it did. "You can sit down now. I'll take it from here." He didn't sit. But he stopped moving, and that was a kind of obedience. And Breyer watched the bride watch this exchange with a face that was working very hard to stay still. "Felicity, isn't it?" Margaret turned to her, almost gentle. "I've heard a lot about you from Joel mostly. He speaks well of you, which I never understood given. He's like that, though, soft, gets it from his dad." She tilted her head. "You hit him." He turned up uninvited and frightened. "You hit my son in front of his little girl on a Saturday afternoon, and 200 people watched you do it, and not one of them so much as handed the child a tissue. Margaret looked around the room slowly, letting the sentence settle on each table it passed. I've been in some hard rooms in my life, some genuinely frightening rooms. And I'll tell you, I've never once seen a crowd this size find a small crying child that easy to ignore. Nobody said anything. The man in the waistcoat at table 9 had gone the color of the tablecloth. "Madam," Gregory finally, smoothing his jacket, stepping in with the voice of a man used to managing things. "I don't know who you are or why you've—" "No, you don't either," Margaret almost smiled. "It's funny, all these clever, well-off people in one room and not a single one of them knows who I am. I'd find that insulting if it wasn't so useful." "This is my wedding," Gregory said, "and I'd ask you to." "It's not, though," she said it lightly. "That's rather the thing I came about." And there it was, the first real crack, the thing the whole afternoon had been leaning toward, and Briar felt the room lean with it. Beside her at table 11, an old woman she'd exchanged maybe 4 words with all afternoon murmured, "Oh, here we go," with the unmistakable relish of someone who has waited a long time to watch a particular family get its comeuppance, and Briar made a note to talk to her later. "What's that supposed to mean?" Felicity said. Margaret didn't answer her directly. She reached into the inside pocket of her coat, and the 8 people by the door didn't move, but Briar noticed the way the room flinched at the gesture anyway, the instinctive bracing of people who'd watched too much television, and what she took out was not dramatic. It was paper. A folded letter, and behind it a photograph old, the colors gone warm and soft the way they do. "Joel," she said without turning round, "tell them what the letter said, the one that brought you here." Joel's jaw tightened. "Mum." "Tell them, word for word, near enough. You read it enough times." He looked at the floor, then at Nell, then, finally, at Felicity, and when he spoke it was only to her, as if the 200 others had gone. "It said you'd been thinking about Nell. That you knew you'd not been, that you'd let years go by. That getting married had made you think about family and you didn't want to start a new life still being a stranger to your own daughter." His voice was very flat, the flatness of a man holding something down. "It said come to the reception, bring her, that you'd kept a place, that you wanted to do it properly in front of everyone so there'd be no taking it back after." He swallowed. "It was your handwriting. It was signed by you. There was a you put a kiss. You used to put a kiss." "I didn't write that." Felicity's voice cracked down the middle. "Joel, I swear to God, I have not written to you in 3 years. I didn't. Why would I invite you to my—" She turned on Margaret. "Is this you? Did you do this? Did you forge?" "I don't forge things," Margaret said. "I find them. There's a difference, and your family taught it to me." She held up the letter. "No, I didn't write this. And neither, I think we all now agree, did you? Which leaves an interesting question, doesn't it? Who sat down a month ago, copied a young woman's handwriting well enough to fool the man who used to love her, and posted it to a forklift driver to make sure he'd turn up to this exact room on this exact afternoon with his daughter in her best dress?" She looked, for the first time, not at Felicity but past her, toward the end of the head table. Who'd want that? Who'd want Joel Ashworth humiliated, publicly today with witnesses? Briar's eyes went where Margaret's went, and she wasn't the only one. A man at the far end of the head table, older, heavyset, a carnation in his lapel, the sort of man who pays for things and expects to be thanked, had been sitting through the whole scene with an expression of distaste, as if a bad smell had got into the room. Felicity's father, Briar guessed. The one paying for the fortune of a wedding. And under Margaret's look, his distaste curdled into something Briar knew well, having watched it cross 1,000 faces across an interview table over the years. The particular stillness of a person who has just realized that the thing they did in private is about to be done to them in public. "Don't be absurd," he said. "I've never met the man." "I didn't say you'd met him, Roland." Margaret's voice was very soft now. "I said you'd want him here." The name went round the near tables in a whisper. Roland. Roland Pelham. Briar didn't know the name, not personally, but she knew the type, and she knew, suddenly and coldly, that she was watching something that had been engineered, that the slap, the silence, the cars, the reveal, all of it, had been set running weeks ago by more than one hand, and that at least two people in this room had walked in this morning thinking they were the one holding the strings. She wanted to know which. That was the thing about Briar. It had got her into trouble her whole career, and it had also made her very, very good at the work. She could not leave a thread alone. And while the rest of the room was watching the spectacle at the head table, Roland Pelham going from red to white, Felicity looking between her father and the letter with dawning horror, Gregory trying and failing to take charge of a thing that had stopped being his to charge, Briar was already pulling at the threads nobody else was looking at. She got up quietly and went not toward the drama but away from it, to the edge of the room where the old woman from table 11 had drifted, the one who'd said, "Here we go." Up close she was older than Briar had thought, 80 at least, sharp-eyed, holding a sherry she clearly had no intention of drinking. "You know them," Briar said, not a question. "Known the Pelhams 40 years. The old woman's eyes didn't leave the head table. "I'm Roland's cousin, hated him since we were 9. He drowned my rabbit." She said it without heat, an old fact filed. "You're not Pelham's side and you're not Hardigan's side, that's the groom's lot, so what are you then? You've been watching this room like a hawk since the soup." "I'm a friend of Mrs. Pelham, the elder, Roland's mother." "Old Iris." The woman's mouth twitched. "Iris doesn't have friends. Iris has people she finds useful." She turned finally and looked at Briar properly, head to toe, and something shrewd moved behind her eyes. "What did you do for her then?" "Iris doesn't invite strays to weddings for the pleasure of their company." Briar didn't answer that, because the answer was the thing she kept folded away, the thing 200 people in this room would have rearranged themselves around if they'd known it. Let them think she was a stray at table 11. It suited her, the same way being underestimated had always suited her work. People said things in front of a woman they'd decided was no one that they'd never say in front of the woman she actually was. "That woman," Briar said instead, nodding at Margaret. "The mother, who is she, really?" The old cousin made a small sound, half a laugh. "Now that," she said, "is the question, isn't it? Joel's mother, Margaret Ashworth." A pause, savoring it. "Except Ashworth's not the name she was born with, and she didn't always drive up to places in 3-motor cars, and there's a reason this family went the color of wet plaster the second she walked through that door." She sipped the sherry at last. "You want the story? It's a good one, but it'll cost you. I'm old and I'm bored and nobody tells me anything anymore. You tell me what you really do for a living, because it's not floristry, pet, I can see your hands, and I'll tell you why 3 Rolls-Royces turned up for a forklift driver." Across the room, Margaret Ashworth had unfolded the old photograph and was holding it up, turning it so the head table could see, and whatever was in it made Diane Pelham put her glass down very carefully, and Roland Pelham get to his feet so fast his chair went over backwards and cracked against the parquet. "Where did you get that?" Roland said, all the smoothness gone. His voice had something in it now that hadn't been there before, and it took Briar a second to name it, because men like Roland Pelham didn't often let it show. "Fear." "You know exactly where I got it," Margaret said. "You've been wondering for 30 years if it still existed. Well," she set it down on the white cloth, face up, in front of the wedding. "It does, and so do I, and so, as of about 20 minutes ago when she watched you ruin her wedding to settle a score she didn't even know about, so does your daughter." Briar looked back at the old cousin, who was watching her with bright, expectant eyes, waiting for her side of the trade. "All right," Briar said. She lowered her voice. "I find things out for a living. People hire me when they need to know what really happened, and the official version isn't it." She let that sit. "Now, the photograph, Margaret, all of it. From the start." The old woman smiled, settled deeper into her chair like someone getting comfortable for a long story, and patted the seat beside her. "Sit down then," she said, "and keep your voice low because what I'm about to tell you, half the people in this room have spent 30 years and a great deal of money making sure never gets said out loud." The story the old cousin told, low and quick while the head table burned, went back 31 years, to a haulage yard on the edge of the city and two young men who'd started it together with one lorry and a handshake. One of them was called Roland Pelham. The other was a man named Davy Ashworth, Margaret's husband, Joel's father, dead now 11 years. They'd built the firm from nothing, the two of them, sleeping in the cab between jobs, and for a while it had been good, Pelham and Ashworth, the name on the side of 40 lorries by the end. Then the recession came, and a contract went wrong, and there was a night. The cousin was hazy on the details. Nobody had ever been allowed to be clear on the details. When a consignment that should have been insured turned out not to be, and a great deal of money vanished, and the books showed it vanishing through Davy Ashworth's side of the business. Except it wasn't Davy, the cousin said. Davy couldn't read a balance sheet to save his life. That was always Roland's end. But Roland had the accountant, and Roland had the paperwork, and Roland made very sure that when the firm went down, it went down on Davy's name. Fraud. They didn't prosecute. Roland made a great show of not prosecuting. Family friend, terrible business, let's keep it quiet, but the word got out exactly as far as Roland wanted it to. Davy Ashworth, the man who ruined Pelham and Ashworth, couldn't get work after, couldn't get credit, drank a bit, then drank a lot. She turned the untouched sherry in her fingers. Roland kept the firm, kept the name minus the Ashworth, kept all of it, built it into what paid for that cake out there. And Margaret watched her husband die slow over 20 years for something he didn't do, and she never could prove it, because Roland had the only copies of everything that mattered. A thin smile. Or so Roland thought. Briar was very still. The photograph. "I don't know what's in the photograph, pet. Nobody does, that's rather the point, but look at his face." Roland Pelham across the room had the gray sweating look of a man watching his own foundations move. Whatever Margaret's got, it's the thing he spent 30 years certain was destroyed, and she didn't bring it to a lawyer, she brought it here, to his daughter's wedding. In front of everyone he spent that money trying to impress. The cousin's eyes glittered. She's not after his money. She could have had that quietly through a court years ago if money was the want. She's after the one thing he actually values, which is what these people in this room think of him. She came to take that, in public, where he can't buy it back. It was, Briar thought, exactly right, and it was also, she could see now, the flaw in Margaret's plan, the place where it might still go wrong. Because public revenge is a knife with no handle. Roland Pelham was cornered, and cornered men with money don't surrender. They reach for the lawyers and the spin and the long, expensive grind, and they say forged, fabricated, the rantings of a grieving widow, and they make the photograph and the story disappear into doubt, and they come out the other side bruised but standing, while Margaret comes out the other side called a liar. Briar had watched it happen 100 times. A truth dropped on a wedding floor was a sensation. It was not yet proof. And without proof, by Monday, Roland Pelham's version would be the one that survived. Which was the moment Briar Calloway stopped being a guest at table 11 and started doing her job. She didn't decide it grandly. She just found herself on her feet, crossing the room toward the head table, threading between the frozen guests, and the closer she got, the more she could see what was actually happening up there underneath the spectacle. Margaret had played her best card. Roland had recovered just enough to start fighting back. That photograph proves nothing. It's a photograph of what? Of nothing. And Felicity was standing between her father and her wedding with her hands pressed to her face. And Gregory had quietly stepped back, Briar noticed, putting distance between himself and his new father-in-law, a man already calculating which way this fell. "It proves nothing on its own," Briar said. "He's right about that." Every head at the table turned. Margaret's eyes found her, sharp, assessing. the look of one professional clocking another. "And who are you?" Roland said, grabbing at her like a lifeline. "Exactly." "Briar Calloway." She said it to Margaret, not to him. "I was hired 18 months ago by Iris Pelham, your mother, Roland, to look into the collapse of Pelham and Ashworth. She's old. She wanted the truth of it before she died. She'd never believed Davy Ashworth did what you said he did. She was right." She turned to Margaret. "I've spent a year and a half on this. I have the accountant's original working papers, the real ones before they were redrawn. I have a sworn statement from the insurance broker your husband used, who's still alive and very tired of being asked to keep a secret. I have the bank records that show where the missing consignment money actually went, which was not into Davy Ashworth's pocket. I didn't have one thing until 20 minutes ago." She looked at the photograph on the cloth. "I didn't have the thing that ties Roland personally to the cover-up in his own hand. I think that's what that is, isn't it?" Margaret looked at her for a long moment. Something passed between them, two women who had each spent years quietly assembling the same truth from opposite ends, and had just discovered, at a wedding, that they'd been digging the same tunnel. "It's a letter," Margaret said slowly, "in his writing, to the accountant, telling him which figures to move and onto whose name." She didn't take her eyes off Briar. "I've had it 30 years. It was the one thing Davy kept back. The night it all went wrong, slipped it out of the file before Roland could collect them all. He gave it to me on his deathbed, told me it'd never be enough on its own. One letter against a man with money. They'd say I planted it, forged it, found it, anything." Her jaw worked. "He told me to keep it for the day someone came along who could put the rest around it. I'd nearly given up believing that day would come." "It came," Briar said. "It's me. And it came 18 months ago. I just didn't know the last piece was sitting in your coat." Iris Pelham had hired Briar to clear a dead man's name, quietly, before her own death. An old woman's last act of conscience about a wrong her son had done and she'd half known about and never stopped. Briar had built the case nearly to completion. The working papers, the broker, the bank trail, all of it lawful, documented, checkable. What she'd been missing was the single piece that turned a strong circumstantial case into one no spin could survive proof in Roland's own hand. Margaret had carried that piece for 3 decades, knowing it was a key with no lock. And now, on a Saturday afternoon at the Ardenmore Hotel, the lock and the key were on the same white tablecloth. Roland Pelham understood it a half-second before everyone else, and he did exactly what the cousin had predicted, what cornered moneyed men always do. This is a coordinated ambush. This woman is some sort of Felicity. Call the hotel manager. I want these people removed. The photograph is a forgery and she's an obvious." "Dad," Felicity's voice, very quiet. She'd bent down at some point in the last minute, Briar realized, and picked something up off the floor, the soft, creased card to Mummy on your SPESHAL day, the stick figures, the sun. She was holding it in both hands. "Dad, did you write that letter, the one that brought Joel here today, so everyone would see him thrown out, so I'd hit him?" Her voice broke. "Did you do that to me? Use me to hurt these people, over something I didn't even know about?" Roland looked at his daughter and the calculation in his face flickered, and for 1 second Briar saw it. She was watching for it. He almost reached for her, almost said the true thing. Then the calculation won because it always had. That was the whole tragedy of him, and he said, "Felicity, you're upset. You're not understanding." "I understand fine," Felicity said, and put the card down on the table next to the photograph and the letter, the 3 pieces of paper side by side, a child's drawing and a dead man's evidence and 30 years of a lie. "I understand I slapped a man in front of everyone I know because you wanted me to, and I didn't even know you were holding the strings." She looked across the room to where Joel stood with Nell. Her face was wet. "Joel, I didn't write that letter, but I did hit you, and that was mine, that was me, and I'm—" She stopped, started again. "Your little girl made me a card, and I let it lie on the floor." It wasn't a grand reconciliation. The prompt of the afternoon didn't allow for one, and neither did the people. Joel didn't smile and forgive her. He just nodded once, the nod of a man who has heard something true and isn't ready to do anything with it yet, and crouched and said something to Nell, who looked at Felicity with the open, wary curiosity of a child recalculating an adult. The justice, when it came, took months, not minutes, because real justice does. Breyer's case, the working papers, the broker's statement, the bank trail, and now Roland's own letter authenticated against 30 years of his correspondence, did not go to a wedding crowd. It went where it could not be spun away, to the firm's auditors, to the insurers who'd been defrauded 3 decades back and had very long memories, and to a financial crimes unit that did not care how much a man had given to charity since. Roland Pelham was not dragged out of the Ardmore in handcuffs. That wasn't how it worked, and Breyer had stopped wanting the cinematic version of these things long ago. He was unwound slowly, in the way that hurts men like him most. The firm investigated. The contracts lost as clients read the news. The name that had been worth so much become a thing people distanced themselves from. The honors and the board seats fell away one by one. He kept some of his money. He lost the thing he'd killed a friend's reputation to buy, which was the regard of the rooms he moved in, and he had the rest of his life to sit with the fact that it had been taken from him at his own daughter's wedding, in front of all of them, by a widow and a forklift driver, and a woman he dismissed as a stray at the back table. Davy Ashworth's name was cleared. It was in the trade press, and then the real press, a small item that meant nothing to most people and everything to a few. The haulier ruined 30 years ago for a fraud he didn't commit, exonerated at last. Margaret had it framed. She told Breyer later that she'd hung it where Davy's chair used to be, and that she'd sat in front of it the first evening and talked to him for an hour, and that it was the first time in 11 years she'd felt she could say his name without it being an apology. Margaret Ashworth, it turned out, had built something of her own in the years she'd been quietly waiting, a logistics company, started small with the insurance from Davy's life, grown careful and large. The 3 Rolls-Royces and the 8 people in dark coats, nothing more sinister than a successful businesswoman and her senior staff, brought along that day for exactly one reason, so that the family who'd called her son a thief would have to watch the woman they'd ruined arrive in a way they couldn't dismiss. She'd never flaunted it. She'd never needed to until the day she did. As for Breyer, Felicity found her, weeks afterward, and asked her the question the old cousin had asked at the wedding, the question people always got round to eventually. Why? Why take it that far? A job that had started as an old woman's quiet conscience. Why stand up at a stranger's wedding and put yourself in the middle of it? Breyer thought about it. She wasn't given to speeches, and she didn't make one. Your grandmother hired me to find the truth, she said. Most people who hire me, what they actually want is a version of the truth they can live with. Iris wanted the real one, even though it was her own son. That's rare. I respected it. She paused. And there was a kid on the floor with a card nobody picked up. I've sat at the back of a lot of rooms watching people decide who matters and who doesn't, watching them get it wrong. Your father looked at Joel and saw a forklift driver. The whole room looked at me and saw a woman at table 11. Your mother, she stopped, corrected herself. Margaret looked at 30 years of being told her husband was a criminal and decided to outlast it instead of believing it. She shrugged, almost. People show you everything if you're the sort of person they've decided isn't worth performing for. I've made a whole life out of being underestimated in rooms. It's the most useful thing about me. Felicity was quiet for a moment. Then, is it lonely, being the person nobody notices? Sometimes, Breyer almost smiled. But you'd be amazed what you get to see, sitting at the back, and what you get to fix every now and then when the people who think they're running the room have no idea you're even in it. She picked up her code. That's the thing nobody who's ever been on top understands, she said at the door. They spend so much time watching each other that they stop watching the rooms, and the rooms are full of people they've decided don't count: the forklift driver, the woman at table 11, the widow they ruined, the kid with the card. We see everything. We remember everything. And every so often, when one of you goes too far, one of us stands up. She put the coat on. Tell your grandmother her dead man's name is clean. She'll know what it cost. And tell that little girl her card got picked up in the end. It mattered that somebody picked it up. Then Briar Calloway, who made her living being the most important person in rooms that never once saw her coming, went out through the doors of the hotel and down the gravel drive, past the place where 3 Rolls-Royces had pulled up on the worst afternoon of a forklift driver's life, and turned the whole thing over a quiet woman, unremarked, walking away from another room she'd quietly set right, exactly the way she liked it.